Okay, so hopefully we can see slides.
Yes, we do.
I imagine. Okay, fantastic. So yes, as we said, my name is Oliver, and this talk is taking flight with Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind has been sort of my CSS framework of choice now for a few years. It's quite different to most of the other sort of typical CSS frameworks. So we'll talk about that during this talk. But yeah, I love talking about Tailwind. I'm primarily a sort of a back-end full-stack developer, so this is obviously more of a front-end sort of topic, but yeah, I do enjoy talking about Tailwind. And yeah, just as a fun fact, these slides are built using Tailwind itself. So I use a tool called RevealMD to do presentations in Markdown, and then I use Tailwind for all the styling. So if people want to find out more about that, you can take a look at my GitHub repository where all that stuff is stored. So yeah, as we said, I'm a software engineer, full stack software engineer. I work at Invika, so we're a company based in the UK and based in Germany and some other people somewhere else. And yes, I split my time between working for Invika and working on freelance projects and contract projects. This is my website here. So I do blogging about Tailwind and Drupal and PHP and lots of other things on my website. And there's a link to my Drupal page and my Twitter page as well. Yes, pretty much OP Davies everywhere online. So my first two initials followed by my surname, Drupal.org and everywhere else. So this is a chart of the technology stacks I typically use. So Drupal, obviously, I've been doing Drupal for, goodness me, 12 or 13 years, I think, at this point. It's getting on a bit. Been doing Symfony for a few years as well, and some other things like Sculpin, which is a static site generator in PHP. Did this talk at a WordPress conference a few years ago and at a WordPress meetup, and I've done some JavaScript work with Vue.js and Angular. But the nice thing about all these things is I've been using Tailwind on all of them, which is quite nice. So it sort of came from the Laravel community, or at least it was started by a developer who came from the Laravel community, but you can use it on anything, including all these things. So what is Tailwind to begin with? These are some quotes from the Tailwind website, at least the website that was there when I built these slides some time ago. And it's utility-first CSS framework for building custom designs. So the key things here for me are utility first. So it's quite different to Bootstrap, which is not utility first, as much as they give you components out of the box. So things like a navbar, and here is the HTML that you need to make the navbar work. And then behind the scenes, there is some CSS that matches with this navbar, for example. So Tailwind is very much the opposite of that. It gives you a lot of classes out of the box that just do one thing very well. So just for setting a padding on an element, there's a class for that, and there's classes for colors, that type of thing. So there's a lot of very small, reusable, recomposable classes, sort of like Lego blocks, and you pile them onto each other. And yes, custom designs, there's not a typical sort of Tailwind looking site in the same way that there is like a Bootstrap, because these things are so low level, you could just reuse them. And this typically you look at a website and go, that's a Bootstrap website, because they're all using the same sort of thing. Whereas for Tailwind, that's not really a thing. I say because the classes it gives you are so level and so reusable. And it also means you can move this from project to project and then reuse the same class names on different projects to get a completely different look and feel, which is awesome. So the other two things to mention here are it's highly customizable. So there's a configuration file that you can have. It gives you a whole list of defaults out of the box, and then you can customize it to be the way that you want it to be. If you want more colors, less colors, more font sizes, less font sizes, more spacing, less spacing, whatever you want to use. And yeah, as I said again, it's very, very low level in terms of it's giving usually one class, one CSS thing per class it's going to give you. Although we can extract components if we want to. And yeah, this is one of my quotes. It's more of I think this is one of mine. It's more than a framework, it's an engine for design systems. So because it gives you this whole sort of set of colors and spacing out of the box, what the utility first approach is going to do is you're going to get more consistent designs because you're reusing the same spacing and the same colors everywhere. So my site uses, I think there's somewhere around 20 different spacing sizes because they're all consistent coming from the same Tailwind generated design system, compared to if I was just to start writing the CSS by hand, and maybe I'm using 14 pixels here and 15 there and 16 there and 1 rem here and everything. So things to me seem a lot more consistent and a lot more polished, so by default really, which is quite nice. So let's see some of the things that Tailwind generates classes for. So these are some of the original sort of ones that were there in some of the earlier versions or from the beginning. So colors for your text and your border and backgrounds, font sizes, font families and font weights, a line left, a line right, and a line middle, padding, or spacing, so padding, margin and negative margin, flexbox utilities for laying out your layouts, positioning, so if you want to position something absolute versus relative versus static, list styling for bulleted lists and numbered lists, Z indexes, so if you want to layer things on top of each other, you can do that as well. Opacity for making things sort of slightly invisible or whatever. And some of the newer things have included screen reader visibility helpers, placeholder colors as well, to be able to specify a first child or a last child and nth child in a list, which is pretty cool. I really like those. CSS grid, so everybody wanted CSS grid when Tailwind was sort of first released, and it got added, I think in the 1.0 version or pretty close to it quite recently. Transitions and transforms, spacing divides. So again, I love these. We'll come back to these a bit later on, I think. So these are just some of the things that it actually generates. It generates thousands of lines of CSS, and it sort of puts people off, I think, to begin with. If you just look at the standard version, so it intentionally gives you more than you need for your project, and you just pick and choose what you need for your project. My DrupalCamp London cup on brand. So this is the Laravel Nova website. So as I say, it sort of came out of the Laravel community or from one of the Laravel community members. So it's used quite a lot within the Laravel community, as you'd imagine. And this website is for a dashboard for Laravel called Laravel Nova. So this site is built, this page is built with Tailwind. This is the Firefox Send website. This is also built with Tailwind. And this looks completely different to the example that we just saw. And then for it's the Drupal meetup, so hopefully most people recognize this. And this is my version of the Bartik theme. So this is again built with Tailwind CSS. No CSS copied from core at all. This was done using empty HTML, empty CSS file, and built to rebuild to look like Bartik. So this took me about, I think, about an hour to do one Friday afternoon, and about another hour to make it, to add some JavaScript to make the menus open and close and things. So yes, like I said, there's no sort of one Tailwind way looking for a site. So how do we use it? So with Tailwind, we apply classes the Tailwind gives us to our elements. So this is quite different, to the typical way that we're taught to write CSS. So normally we write our markup in a certain way, and we apply classes to it or IDs to it, and then we'll switch to a completely different file, different style sheet, different CSS file, and we'll start writing styles that match the markup that we just wrote. So there's this constant back and forth switching between HTML, CSS, HTML, CSS, back and forth. The nice thing with Tailwind is we're doing everything inside the HTML, or at least as much as we can get away with. And then because we don't need to generate the classes, so things are a lot quicker to build with Tailwind. We don't need to keep switching back, adding a new class, coming back again. We've got a whole selection of classes that Tailwind generates for us via the config file that we can just apply. And then we don't need to start thinking of crazy names for things either. If something's, we can just think, okay, this needs to be text large, color red, padding, whatever, underline something. So it really takes away that first thing of what do I have to name this thing? And you can just start thinking, what does it sort of look like? What does it need to do? And yeah, because we're taking this approach, using the existing classes that Tailwind gives us, we can build our designs without writing any CSS at all. And that's been the case on some of my projects. The Bartik example, I think, doesn't have any CSS in it at all, any custom CSS. It's all CSS generated by Tailwind. Now, you might have to write CSS for some things, and you can sort of extract things out if you want to. You can sort of use Tailwind behind the scenes and sort of build on top of it. We'll look at that later on. But yes, you writing a lot less CSS and using the classes that it gives you inside the markup. So as I said, we aren't wasting time and energy now having to think of class names. So I remember writing class names like sidebar left in a top wrapper something, just to give something a name. And in fact, it may have just been a flex container, or it might have just needed some margin or something applied to it. Because I can just apply these classes directly on the element now, I don't need to worry about this class name and trying to think of something to name it. And we all know that naming things can be quite difficult sometimes. So it's getting away from having to think of that. And because we're just reusing the same styles all the time, our CSS stops growing. So we're not going to have to make a new style sheet for a new component. And then suddenly now we've gone from 5 style sheets to 10 style sheets to 50 style sheets. And maybe we're just half of that is just saying display block or certain orders reusing the same colors. Because we're just reusing what's already there, the CSS that actually is generated can be very, very small. And then we're not just duplicating the same things all the time. With a traditional approach, we're always writing new CSS, which this doesn't do. And then making changes feel safer. So CSS typically is normally global. So you see something in your style sheet, and at least for me, sometimes I can go in, I want to change this now, something in here, and then I'm worried about what else that's going to be affecting elsewhere on my site. HTML otherwise is local, so you can see exactly what's being applied to that element. And if I want to change a color or adjust some padding or some margin or something, I can do that in my HTML and not worry about affecting everything else, somewhere else on my page that I don't know about yet. So here's a couple of screenshots from the Tailwind site, or at least an earlier version of it. It's not the full thing. There's a whole, it's probably about half of it. I would encourage you to go and take a look at the actual Tailwind CSS website and look at the whole thing if you're interested. But this should give us a bit of an idea of how the workflow works, how the process works. So on the left, you've got some code, and on the right, you've got a little sort of customer business card sort of thing. And you can see that on the left, there is no custom CSS being written. We've got a background white, and we've got a rounded LG on our outer wrapper. So that's just going to set the BG is background, and rounded LG is going to apply some rounded corners, large rounded corners to this element, which is a little bit difficult to see on the white background, I appreciate. Then the image, then we have a height and a width, so H for height and W for width, and then 16, these have got a number scale from 1 up to, I think, 32 or 64 by default. And each of these recognizes relates to a number. So 4 is 1 rem, and then everything is proportional from there. So 16 is 4, 8, 12, 16, so 4 rems. So we can see then we can start applying more classes to make more changes. So if we want to add some spacing, we can add P6, so padding level 6, which moves everything inside. So if we just go back one slide, we can see that the photo there's right up against the top left-hand corner. So by adding that padding, we're moving it into the center and making some space. We can make the image a circle by applying rounded full. So that's going to apply 100% border radius to our image to give it that circle. We can move it into the center by applying margin to the left and to the right. So M is for margin, and X is the X axis, so left and right. So we'll apply auto to left and right. We can make the text large by using text LG. So text has sort of a t-shirt size approach. So XL, XS for small, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. Then colors have a numeric scale. So each color has between 100 to 900. So we're going to apply a medium sort of color purple to the person's job title here. and then we can apply a color gray, so a slightly darker gray to the email address and the phone number here. We can move everything into the center by applying text center, so text alignment center. And yeah, hopefully that gives us just some some sort of idea of how this works. So we're applying things just directly by adding classes into our markup. So again, this goes further, and it sort of shows responsive and other things that we'll get to in this talk as well. But yeah, if you want to go take a look at it, you can take a look at the actual website. So how do we actually go about using it? So there is a CDN. There's an unpackaged.com link that we can use, and that's just the full unminified, uncompressed, unpurged link, which is fine. And that's sort of fine if you're just doing a quick prototype or something, but really you want to install it via npm. So it's a PostCSS package that we can just apply, add via npm into our package.json file, and add it as a dependency. But this way we get full control of everything. We can add plugins, the whole library of plugins that are available that we can use. We can override the configuration file. We can use directives like apply, things that we'll come to later on that we couldn't do with the normal sort of CDN version. So how to install it through npm? As I said, it's just available on npm as a package, so we can install it using the npm command or using the yarn command. And the package name is just Tailwind CSS. So this will add it to our package.json file, but now we need to add it to our CSS itself. So we have a source file. So I typically use just PostCSS now as well, because you can use it with Sass or Less or any of the pre-processors that are already there. But as it's been compiled with PostCSS anyway, I've just started using PostCSS for my actual CSS itself. And then if I need something like nesting, there are plugins for that as well. So this is my source file. This is an app.pcss for PostCSS file. And then we've got the app Tailwind directives here. So these are custom PostCSS directives, which I think that's the right word for these things. And like Tailwind refers to them as layers. There's the 3 layers of Tailwind. First is the reset styles. So it pulls in some CSS reset. Then there's a components, which by default just includes a container wrapper, and then all the utilities, which are the main part of what we've got there. And when we run PostCSS on this, it's going to look for those placeholders and then replace the placeholders with the actual CSS. So PostCSS is more of a post processor rather than a pre-processor, if that makes any sense. Yeah, this is quite important. If you're going to write your own styles, which you can totally do, then you need to do it in the right order. So in order for the cascade to work properly, this is one of the main sort of issues I've seen people using Tailwind before, is that they just had to group all their stuff at the bottom of the file. And then what we don't get is that sort of cascade, that C in CSS where everything needs to be the less specific stuff at the top, followed by the most specific at the bottom. So we want to include our custom base styles after Tailwind's base styles, any custom components after Tailwind's components, and then any custom utilities after Tailwind's utilities. So we can apply components on top of base styles to override them. And then similarly, if you want to apply a utility on top of a component, we can then do that as well. It will override because it cascades properly. In the newer versions, actually, they've got a new layer directive, which I think is the first time I've mentioned it in doing this talk. So we can also say layer components. It then doesn't matter in which order you actually put them in, and then Tailwind will sort of process everything and put them in the right order. So this is quite cool as well. Something I started doing in some of my projects. This was added quite recently, I think. And it also has some advantages of purging, which I'll come on to later on. So now we've got our source file. We actually need to build it somehow and process the PostCSS or the source file to give us our Tailwind project. So Tailwind does give us a command to do that. It's called Tailwind build. And we specify the source file and then the output file. So the source file is the one we just saw, and then the output file is going to be the compiled version there. So in this case, we're just going to take the source file from the source directory and then output it into build. and just drop that's the PCSS extension as well. And yeah, here's just a really, really small sort of snippet of what that looks like. So these are the text align classes. So left, center, right, and justify. And this is great. Most likely, if I usually do this, or you can just write PurgeCSS package.json scripts. That works fine as well. But usually I'm doing this with some sort of JavaScript in a theme or in any sort of project as well. So I like using Webpack Encore, which is something provided by Symfony, although it's not specific to Symfony. So again, it's just another npm package, and we could just say npm install at Symfony/Webpack Encore. Then we can configure it by specifying our webpack.config file. So this is just a layer on top of Webpack. And we can specify our output directory, our public path here, which is just build. We can add a style entry, which is just going to, in this case, it's called app. So it's going to generate an app.css file. We'll specify the same source. And we just need to enable the PurgeCSS loader at the end, so it knows how to process PurgeCSS. Again, if you're going to use Sass or anything, you'd enable the extra loader as well. That's the way I like to do it. So again, if you could use it, you could use let's say a Laravel mix I've used quite a lot, or you could use Gulp or Grunt or anything. This is just the way I quite like to do it. We need a PurgeCSS config file as well. So this just enables the Tailwind plugin. So this is just a JavaScript object with an array of plugins. Again, so if I was using something like PurgeCSS nested, that would go inside here as well. And then we can run Encore dev, and it's going to run the Webpack command, run the build, and you can see here it's going to generate an app.css file, which is a big app.css file, because as I said, it generates a lot of HTML. And in a Drupal theme, we're going to add this into our libraries.yaml file or something like that. But for example, here, let's just say we've got an example HTML document, and we'll just add it in as a style sheet, which is what the libraries.yaml file would do anyway, actually. Yeah, this is the build version rather than the source version. That's the main thing. Okay, so next actually looking at interaction states. So these are things like hover, focus, active states, disabled states, things like that. And most of the things we've seen so far, things like text left and text right, are very, very similar to inline styles. And a lot of people say, why not just use inline styles for this? So this is where we start sort of separating away from inline styles because of things like this. The nice thing about this is that we can specify the state, then a separator, and then the class name. So any class name the Tailwind generates potentially can be added to it only on a certain state. So the state is, again, hover, focus, group focus, whatever. Then there's a separator. So this is usually a colon. Although, again, if you're working on a project and you don't want it to be a colon, you can change it. That's fine. But typically, by default, it's a colon. And then the class name. So whatever the class name was before, it's the same class name now. So it's not like, trying to think of like the Bootstrap example, we've got col-md-6. So the MD, the medium, is in the middle of the class name. The thing I like about this is it's just prefixing the same class name, which for me is just quite a nice thing. So here's the example. So we've got text red 500, and we're going to apply that class when the thing has been hovered over. So hover colon text 500. This is the CSS that it generates. So text red 500 is our normal one. It applies that color. And then on hover, we're going to escape the colon because we can do that in CSS. That's fine. We can use it as a class name. And then when we're hovering over it, we'll change the color, and likewise for focus. So yeah, this is how we'd use it in some HTML. So you've got a link, and it's going to be text red 500 by default. And then when we hover over it, it's going to be a slightly darker red because we're going to apply text red 800 when we hover over it. So this is a snippet of the default configuration. There's this key called variants. We can see here exactly which modules Tailwind is going to enable us for. So everything, I believe everything is responsive by default. But you can see here background color has hover and focus enabled as well. So we can apply background colors on hover and focus, but not any of the others currently by default. So yeah, I did mention responsive as well. Everything Tailwind also can be responsive, and we just do that by specifying a screen name rather than the interaction state at the beginning. So we still have the same class name, we still have the same separator key, we just have a screen. And these are the screens we get by default, although I think Tailwind 1.9 was released this week, and I think they've added a 2XL screen now as well. But these are the default ones with small, medium, large, and extra large, and these relate to these widths here. And these are a minimum width media queries. So it encourages a mobile first approach. But again, if you don't want to use mobile first, you can change the screens to be maximum width, or if you don't want 2XL in your project, you can remove it. Or if you don't want LG, you want to change it, you can do that. And yeah, we just use that key. So again, like the left-hand side there is the name of the screen. We apply that to the name of the class, and then prefix it there again. So exactly the same way as we did with the interaction state. And also we can chain them. So we can have an element which is BG red 500 when we hover over it, but only on a medium screen, which is quite cool. And the same thing applies for all the other interaction states as well. So here's an example with display block. See what display block is just display block. And then we've got our media query with a minimum width of 640. That is our small breakpoint, so SM:block. And then likewise there for medium with that other one. And here's an example of how we'd use that. So let's say we've got some columns, and our outer wrapper is display block on mobile. So we've got our two columns stacked on top of each other, and each one of those has a width full. So it's going to take up the whole width. And then on medium screen, we want to display the columns side by side. So the wrapper we're going to change to be display flex, and then each column is going to have a width of 1/2. And that's the thing I like about this, is it actually says 1/2, which is really obvious what it does in some ways, but it's almost like once you start using this, you can almost start guessing what the classes are. It's quite interesting. Okay, so let's talk about keeping the file size small. So I said it generates a lot of classes by default, so on purpose. And we can do this by disabling any variants and plugins that we don't want to use. So here's that variance list again we saw earlier on. And let's say we just don't want to use any line self classes. I don't think I've ever used any myself. So we can remove them. We can just change that, remove that array and make it false. And Tailwind just won't generate any line self classes. And then let's say we don't want the hover and focus for background colors. So we can just take those out of the array and it'll be fine. And they just won't generate them. So we'd end up with a lot less CSS in that case. So we can also manually remove them. So here's another snippet of the config file. So let's say, again, we don't want an Excel screen. Maybe for this project, we don't need one. So we can just remove it from our screens key. And let's say we don't want gray 200, 400, 500, 800. Again, we can just remove them and they just won't get generated. So we end up with a lot less classes being generated. This is fine, but there is a way of doing it automatically. It's using a library called PurgeCSS. And PurgeCSS is enabled by default and included by default with Tailwind as a 1.4. So you're always able to use it, but you had to configure it separately, which now it's been included in, which makes it a lot cleaner and a lot more of a best practice approach. So in our config file again, we've now got a purge key, and it's most of simplest form. We can just specify an array of paths, and then when we run the production build, the production version, PurgeCSS is going to scan all the files and all the paths you specify here, look for any classes that Tailwind has generated. If it doesn't find them, it removes them from the CSS. So you only get the CSS you've actually used inside your file. So this is great because then we're cutting it down from a couple of megabytes to a couple of kilobytes potentially. And yeah, there are some considerations to use when you're writing your classes this way. But yeah, once you sort of learn what you do, what the practices are, it's not a problem. So yeah, if we're using Webpack Encore, we can run Encore dev. this is our development build. This will give us everything. When we're working locally, we want everything, so we can apply things easily. But if we're running a production build, then we want to run Encore prod, or set the node environment to be production, and that will trigger the PurgeCSS config to run in production mode and run the purge and the modification thing. So we only get then what we actually need. Another common question I get is, how do we deal with the repeating classes, and how do we deal with the sort of maintenance of it? So most people are always sort of worried about having, if we've got 10 classes on an element, how do we deal with it? How do we maintain it? So one thing we can do is extract components. So in Drupal, we're using Twig now, and WordPress has WordPress template parts. And if you view and React, you have partials that you can use there. Or we can avoid the repetition by extracting components. So what we're essentially doing here is, rather than having the same classes multiple times, we're just moving them into a single source of truth inside one file and including them multiple times. One sort of key thing I think to ask here is, does something justify becoming a component? So maybe you don't want to extract everything. So things like a nav bar, again, like a nav bar is a pretty interesting example, because like you can always name a nav bar, but you've only got one nav bar. So do you need to name it, because there's only going to be one of them? So yeah, it's an interesting sort of thing. Again, it's getting away from that idea of just trying to find a name for everything. You don't necessarily need it. And again, could you move the duplication elsewhere? So like a template partial, like a view component or something. So here's an example of that. This is from a Twig file, and I've got an array of nav items in this case here. And you see we're just going to loop over them with the for loop, and each link is going to have these set of classes on it, and basically output the URL and the title in the right place. So because we're using a loop, now that list of classes is only written once. So regardless of, we may have 100 links, just to pick a really high number, and you might look at the source code that it generates and go, oh, there's those links are being repeated everywhere. But because we're using a loop, if we wanted to change everything, the color or a text size or something, we can do it in one place here and have it update them all. Another way would be to actually use includes as well. So in this case, I'm just passing through. This is what I did for a martial arts school I was training at. Here, this is just like a list of all the adult classes, all the kids classes, and I've got a class list partial. And all I'm doing is passing in the dynamic parts, and in the partial here, then all the classes, all the duplications be moved elsewhere. So rather than having two separate class lists with duplicate classes, I've only got one. And again, if I want to change one, any of the styles on them, I can just change it in one place, and it will update them both there. So things like buttons, you may want to extract sort of components for, like HTML components for, but Tailwind also has this apply functionality here. So again, any class that we can apply to an element directly, we can sort of use apply on at the CSS level. So these are sort of CSS components, I guess, really. Let's say we do want a BTN button class, then we can just use apply in our source file, and then when we come to do the build, Tailwind will go, okay, what CSS would I have added if I'd have added text SM to the element, and we'll apply it to the CSS at build time. And then currently as well, it doesn't work with interaction states like hover, so you have to specify that separately. So you can see I've got button hover, although in a new version there is an experimental flag that you can enable to allow you to do it. It does cause a very slight, very obscure breaking change, but I've not had any problems with it. I've used it on a few projects here. So essentially, we're just using these things as mixins. So it's very similar to the sort of extend or things that SAS would give us anyway. But we're still using values from Tailwind's sort of design system. Again, we've still got the same spacing, the same colors available to us at this point. So we've still got that consistency. We're still using the same sort of design system. Yeah, and again, here's what that generates. So again, if it takes the CSS it would have applied and then just applies it directly in the CSS. And some people quite like this. If you're used to writing sort of the BEM style syntax or something that you're used to writing, you could do that and then just build it up using apply with Tailwind underneath if you wanted to. And I know some people who've started doing it that way. Yeah, so that's an option too. So how do we customize it? We talked quite a lot about about customizing. Let's see how we do that. So we need to generate a config file. We don't need a config file by default, but if we want to customize it, then also we need one. So we can just run npx tailwind init, and it will generate this file for us. So we've seen this a couple of times already. Typically, it's called tailwind.config.js. It's just a JavaScript object. So there's a whole default set of settings that it's inheriting, and it's then merging these on top of that or into that. So this is just our own theme set, our own settings on top of the defaults, which makes it a lot easier, I think. In the earlier versions, you had everything in this file, so all the defaults and everything, and you were responsible then for maintaining the whole thing. So the thing I like about this now is, it is just yours, right? It's much clearer to see what you're changing and what the defaults are. So let's say we want to add some colors. So maybe we've got a design system or something provided to us, or a color palette, something looking for from a designer, and we want to add our colors in here. So we can specify colors inside the theme key. So it's inside theme. Theme is our colors and spacing, etc. So we can do this and specify inherit, and then the left is the name of the class, and then on the right is the value. So in this example, they both happen to be inherit. Yeah, bit of a bad example, apologies. But this will override all the colors the Tailwind is going to generate. So we do have a color palette. We want this color red and this color green, etc. Then you can just override the whole thing. If you did want to sort of extend it and then add to what Tailwind gives you by default, which you probably would for this case, is we want to put it inside the extend key rather than at the high level. So you can see we've just moved colors into extend here. So then Tailwind knows to add that to the defaults rather than replace them. So we've got a couple of other interesting options here. Prefix is one, so you can all the classes Tailwind generates can have a prefix. So this is empty by default, but I maintain a starter kit theme for Drupal for Tailwind. And block is the example there where we get a conflict. So Drupal uses a class of block for the actual blocks, whereas Tailwind thinks block is display block. So I've added a prefix. So I think it's TW dash, Tailwind dash, to avoid that conflict. And then likewise, if you've got Bootstrap or Bulma or some other CSS framework as well, and you want to avoid clashes, you could use that there too. And then important is false by default, but if you want to use important for all the things, which for the utilities isn't a bad idea, I'd argue, then we can set that to true, and that will be fine. If you did want the full file, we can use tailwind init dash full, and this will give us the whole config, including the defaults. But yeah, why? Not sure why. So as I mentioned, there are plugins available that we can use. This is one that I maintain. It's called Tailwind CSS List Reset. And it's another npm package. So we can install it using npm install. And yeah, we add it into our plugins key in our config file. So we just require the module. And this is the CSS that this one generates. So this used to be in Tailwind core prior to 1.0 being released, and then it got removed. So I use it on some projects still. So I thought I'd write a little plugin that did it, and I can reuse it across my projects. And this is the JavaScript file that it uses to generate it. So Tailwind gives us some functions and methods like add utilities by default that we can plug into. And then we use a sort of a CSS JS type syntax to generate these classes. So this is obviously a really simple example, but there are obviously a lot more complex versions of this, but this is a good example. And then lastly, we pass to our variants, so whether we want a responsive version or a any of the variants we want there as well. So I think we've got a couple of minutes to do a little bit of a demo. So I've done a few of these recently, actually. I think one of my favorite ones I've done is we've seen the Bartik one, I think. That was an example sort of slides. So you can see exactly how that one looks. So you can check all these out on, these are all on my GitHub, and there are links to them elsewhere. I did a rebuild of Acquia's hosting dashboard. This is quite fun. This is built with Vue.js. It actually uses multiple pages and things. So again, this is all built from scratch using plain HTML and Tailwind CSS, which is quite interesting. One of my favorite ones I think I've done recently has been, if I get zoom out of the way. No, it's fine. I'll just work around it. I did this talk for Leeds PHP, from the PHP groups in the UK recently. So again, being a Drupal and Symfony person, I thought I'd do the Symfony homepage this time. So this is the actual Symfony homepage itself. And then this is my version of it built with Tailwind. So again, I've not taken any CSS from the existing site, but I have taken these little icons and things. But all the CSS and HTML is written from scratch. And again, it's not pixel perfect. It's not got everything in there, but a lot of it I think is pretty close. And yeah, if you just have a look at some of the code that does this. Again, this is all on GitHub. You can take a look if you want. This is my config file. So my purge, this is just a flat HTML file. We start off with our index file. So just HTML that I've written. And in some cases, I've extracted things out. In some places, I haven't. So in this case, I'm quite happy with some repetition up here personally. Actually, it's not the time. Something I've started doing recently is actually breaking this onto multiple lines. So I quite like doing that. If there's quite a lot of them, so maybe group the hover ones together and the focus ones together. That makes it a bit more readable, I think. I do quite like doing that. And I see we've got some top and bottom padding. We've got a background gray of 100. Using some dark mode features here as well. So I've added a custom media query here called dark, which is based on this media query that we get at an OS level. So I'm prefixing it with dark in this case. So we could say it's gray 100 by default and 800 if it's dark, and PY 15 if it's medium. So again, this is all responsive as well. I've added a couple of custom things in here as well. So we just find those. So yeah, we've got our base. So I'm setting some base styles here. So a couple of default styles for all our links. So our base things are sort of grouped here. So just put maybe just put like an end base or something here. These are our base styles. Then our components. So I've added a nav item. So rather than repeat nav item everywhere, I've added a nav item class, which is used on all of our navigation items here. So again, using this @apply thing pretty much everywhere here. And then we also able to use @screen, which I don't think I've mentioned till now. So we can do our responsive things using @screen, LGX screen dark. So I am using the PostCSS nested thing in here, I think. Yeah, so this is why I'm able to use nesting inside here, because I'm using this plugin. So it looks very SaaS-like actually. And yeah, then I've added a couple of custom utilities at the end here as well. So we can just add utilities at the end of our file if we want to, which is fine. So I've copied a couple of filter ones. So yeah, I've tried to typically I'll build like a design, like my own design system. So I maybe would add 1, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or something and build a little system out of it. Here I'm just doing 1 and 100, and then wrapping it in that responsive generates the responsive versions of it as well. Let's see, is there anything else that's interesting? Using, yeah, we've got the Webpack configuration here again as well, using Encore. And yeah, let's just see here, we've got using some purge, using one file for our purging, and just completely overriding the colors. So I'm not using all the Tailwind's defaults. I'm using, I've picked these from the Symfony website. And again, like if I didn't want this to be called black, if I want this to be called dark, I can do that in here. And I got, if we don't want to use colors, maybe I want them called primary, and that's going to be maybe primary is something, and that'll just generate primary classes as well. Overriding some grays, overriding some font families, and yeah, then just oversetting that. So let's just see. And again, yeah, this is all sort of responsive. I'm using some inline SVGs here, and then setting. Let's see, yeah, setting different things. So fill current is going to change the fill, so we can style them using text utilities, which is quite interesting. We've got some CSS grid in here, I think, as well, if I remember rightly. There we go. So yeah, using CSS grid by using a grid class, and one column by default with a gap of 10, and then on medium screens it's going to be 3 columns. Yeah, some quite interesting stuff in here actually. It's quite good. As I said, it's all sort of responsive, and we can sort of move things there and back as well. Yeah, the other one I did recently was BristolJS. I did this for a JavaScript group in the UK as well recently. This was another sort of fun one that I did using, this one's done using Vue.js because it's JavaScript, JavaScript meetup. So I thought I'd do one in Vue.js. So yeah, these are all, I think we can go to opdavies/tailwind repos. I think that's the link. So I think we can just go to GitHub and we can see like all my GitHub repos here that have Tailwind in them. So yeah, there's BristolJS and there's Symfony, and yeah, there's quite a few ones in there. So I would encourage people to have a look at that maybe if you want to afterwards. Aha, yes, so some useful links. TailwindCSS.com is the main documentation website. As I said, I maybe didn't say, but it's all open source and free, so you can use this on any project. Tailwind UI is their paid component library. So they've released a whole set of components like headers and page layouts and things, and cards built on Tailwind classes. So that's actually by the creators of Tailwind themselves. Built with Tailwind is a nice sort of community contribution site where you can submit your links for people to just look at. Adam does some streaming and things on YouTube where he does sort of rebuilding UIs like those examples, but does them for other things. There's a Tailwind Labs YouTube that's got created quite recently as well. There's the base theme that I mentioned. So, ooh, that's interesting. So yeah, there's a base kit that I've done. I was doing this quite often for Drupal projects. I thought I'd just make a starter kit theme so you can download it and try it or rename it and use it as a base for your own projects. And yes, some blog posts and then that Tailwind repos URL that I just mentioned. Yeah, and then on the Drupal Slack, there's a Tailwind CSS channel there as well, where myself and I think we're 20 or 30 other Tailwind Drupal people have been there. And not all ones who've used the starter kit, but ones who've done their own implementation of Tailwind in Drupal as well. So come and hang out there if you want to. And yeah, this is something I found quite recently. This is a tweet that I was copied on another reply on this thread, but this is someone who saw me do a version of this talk at the WordPress conference. And yeah, we had this whole sort of discussion afterwards of how it doesn't look very nice and whatever. Yeah, I might just try it for 10 minutes or 2 weeks or something. And everybody has that initial thing of, oh, my HTML is messy and how is it maintainable? I sort of encourage people just to try it for an amount of time, and when you start seeing the benefits of it and how quick you can be with building things, yeah, you probably will be convinced. Yeah, if you're not, then fine. But this was great because I saw this afterwards, and I got mentioned. I thought this was quite cool. So yeah, we had a whole discussion about it. He went and tried it, and now he uses it for all his things, which I think is quite cool. I don't know if we have time for questions. If we do, I'm happy to do questions. But yeah, here's a link to my stuff if people want to get in touch afterwards and ask questions or things afterwards as well.
I have a very important question about classes in Drupal. So Drupal by default delivered a lot of templates with predefined classes in it. In your base theme, how did you rewrite them? Did you use your apply solution, or did you rewrite all class in every template?
A mixture, I think. So I typically, if we use this one as an example, actually, you can see exactly what's going on. So on the Drupal 8 version, yeah, it's a mixture. So like in the source directory, I've got a file, and you can see we've got components. Yeah, there are some components here. So applying some default styling to our form inputs and blocks and nodes and things. So that's fine. That's using @apply that we saw already. So I'll typically do some sort of global level styling with these. That's fine. But then in actual templates, there's not that many, I don't think. You'd be surprised. So like, it's not that big a theme anyway. Like, it's not intended to be like a whole built theme. It is a starting point. So yeah, you can see I'm just using an add class. Sort of, no, that was there before, I think. I don't see any utility classes in there. That's interesting. I'll go back and check that one later on. Let me try something like layout definitely does. Yeah, so either just putting them straight on here, or using sort of .add class like we saw probably in the other slide. And yeah, in earlier versions, I was adding this prefix. So yeah, Tailwind -container. Yeah, and then in Drupal 7, like that was needed. I've not had that problem in Drupal 8. So let's see, 8.3 is fine. I think 4, maybe I've taken it away. Yeah, so in 4 it's gone. I don't see I've not had any issues with conflicting classes anyway. So yeah, that's I haven't had that many issues with it. I'd say with Drupal 7 we've had to, because the block example is one that springs to mind, but yeah, with Drupal 8 I haven't had any examples at all. I did quite a bit of testing with it on a couple of different projects actually, and yeah, it's fine.
Did you have experience of migrating, for example, similar project made by Bootstrap to Tailwind CSS?
Yeah, I think one of my projects, one of my freelance projects, is primarily Bootstrap, and then I've been using Tailwind on top of that. And like, there's nothing to say you can't use one and the other at the same time. So I don't have it, but let's see if we had I don't know, let's see a div with some classes on it. If I try to remember how Bootstrap works. So yeah, let's say we had, call MD4 or something. So that's a Bootstrap class. There's nothing stopping us adding like Tailwind text large on here, right? And that's how a lot of people sort of get into it and start using it. They say, oh, I'll maybe use it for text sizes and paddings maybe for now, and then that's sort of how they get going with it, and then slowly they sort of realize, oh, I could do more things with this. And yeah, that's a perfectly valid way of doing it, as long as I suggest you purge it. But what you then could do, I know this is maybe if I go back in here, like if you were to remove Bootstrap whatsoever, like Bootstrap completely, MD4 again, like that could be, we could just redo it with we could redo it with Tailwind. So we could do like MD width 1/4. That it's, I don't know. Like, there used to be a saying, right? If you want a website, use WordPress. But if you want to build WordPress, use Drupal. It's sort of the same thing. It's like if you want CSS, you can use Bootstrap. If you want to build Bootstrap, you can do it with Tailwind. So I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say or not, but like, yeah, you could totally build Bootstrap with Tailwind if you want to do that. I do like this. I prefer this, like the prefixing and the thing, rather than that. So personally, but there we are.
I was asking that because it's very interesting. What is the size of equal projects that build with Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS? According to your demonstration, Tailwind should be tiny enough, more tiny than Bootstrap.
In terms of the CSS that gets generated by the end, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're using Purge. Like, let's see, do I have it in here? Build. So this one is the default version, right? So this is how much is this here? 23,000. Like all the styles, right? Lots and lots of styles. So if I was to run like npx encore production, this I think should do the purging. Let's double check. I think I've got the yes, and I've got the environment set there, so that's fine. So now hopefully we should have a much smaller file. So yeah, that's all the CSS that I've used on this page. So it's been purged and compressed in this case as well. But yeah, it is, you know, it's surprising how like a lot of people just go, oh yeah, like they want the HTML to be really clean, but they don't care how much CSS is around that they don't use. That's something that I found. Again, if you maybe take a look at this site, this is again, this is my site. It's built with Tailwind, and it's 2 kilobytes, you know, or 5.3 kilobytes. So that's much smaller, and you know, a lot of that's because it's using Purge as well. So yeah, you only get what it needs. So yeah, even though it looks massive by default, and it is, because it intentionally gives you more than you need. But yeah, the ideal point is you purge out what you don't use, or you do it manually like I showed. And yeah, you get much smaller results in the end.
We also have a question in chat. Can you open chat screen and scroll to the bottom?
Chat.
Or I can.
How about purging with classes chosen not in a template file? Okay, that's a good question. That's something that I've sort of struggled with that starter kit for a little while. So yeah, my site's a good example of this actually. So let me see. So the way I'm doing it is I'm using, majority of my classes are inside templates or inside the CSS, as you'd sort of expect. I'm sorry, I'm looking down because I'm looking at my screen, that's all. Broken file, apologies. Okay, so what I'm doing here, is looking for Purge. So this is the slightly alternative way of using Purge. You can set a mode here now as well, but you can set, like, this is the same array we'd set in the slides. So yeah, we're going to look inside templates and then any directory and then any twig file. So that's going to pick up those. Now I'm pulling in all the things inside my config file, or exported config files. So anything with a view that I'm using. There's a couple, I think. I tend to not do it that way, but there's a couple. So there's that way. I also have a couple of things inside my body fields as well, which again I'm not totally. So I generate this file, which is body field values.txt, and that's just I have a command which is somewhere that does that. You see, I can find that very quickly. And yeah, just basically, and that just exports all of the things from in here, and yeah, export body. It does what it says. Exports body values for theme purging. So this just goes through some tables and exports everything into a file that we can see, and I include that in my purge, so that it might generate a couple of additional things, but I don't like. I much rather have that than too much. So yeah, I'm planning on writing a blog post about this at some point. It's in progress, which I think is quite nice. There are options in here to do whitelisting, like actually a purge. Yeah, cute. At the purge level itself, so we can pass like anything in here as well into the same config, so we can whitelist things. So we can say, you know, don't purge these things and keep them there. We can specify patterns and things as well. So I was doing that for quite a while, and this was getting quite long and quite complex. So the way I think I've been doing it now, I've not had too many problems with. So it's just a case of, like, you could even have it maybe look at your pre-processed files. I thought that was actually accurate then. That's my rebuild. That's brilliant. Yeah, you could, you know, have Purge look at your module files and look at your, or maybe maintain a separate file if you wanted to make sure you don't lose anything. But yeah, that's the way I've sort of settled on here, is including them both in there, and that seems to work quite well for me anyway. But yeah, now again, it's, you know, just add things to this content array or something. Yeah, it's a good question.
It looks like there are no other questions, or if anybody wants to ask, you can do it in chat, or you could ask by voice if you want.
Okay. Yeah, like, again, I know it looks weird, and I know it looks like everybody's reaction always is, oh my god, look at all those classes, like, and that's totally valid. You know, thing to begin with. I had it. I'm sure we all had it at the beginning, but I would sort of encourage you to try it. There's also, this is something that's new, is play tailwindcss.com. It's also quite cool. This was just released by the Tailwind sort of team, and it's all built into like a web generator thing. So yeah, you can do that, like set everything in here, and you can just be just like change everything in here, and it just updates in real time. And I can't type apparently. There we are. Or just we can change. There's our CSS file, and here's some config. We can overwrite the config even in here. This is great. So yeah, if you just want to try it out, this is a great thing to get started. Yeah, certainly give it a try. Like I did, give it a try. Try it for a day or an afternoon or 2 weeks or something, and see. Like I've been using it for pretty much everything now for quite a few years. So with this approach.
So
thanks again for having me speak.
We can try now to rebuild platform Pantheon admin in addition to Acquia admin.
I've started doing platform SH a while ago. I've not picked it up for a while, but yeah, anything. I thought I'd try and do sort of some of the Drupal-y ones. I know Adam's done some other ones, but I thought I'd try to do some Drupal ones. I definitely put it. What I need to do a little blog post actually, and just group them all together and do them all. But yeah, that'd be fun. I quite like doing that. I want to do some more. I've done a few live streams on YouTube where I've been doing things, so maybe I'll do it on YouTube and I'll stream the thing. That would be fun.
Thank you, great. That is great. Thank you very much. It was very funny and experience.
Cool. Again, yeah, thanks everyone for having me speak. It's been great fun, and yeah, all the best with your DrupalCamp next year.